Marisa, why are you doing this?
Marcus, you don't deserve to be married into this family. I don't know what my sister sees in a failure like you. You have nothing, and you still act like you belong here.
Elena.
No, Marcus, not today. Don't make a scene today.
I thought being humiliated by my wife's family was the worst thing they could do to me. They laughed at me. They poured a drink over me. They treated me like I was the least important person in the room. What they didn't know was that the same man they believed was worth nothing was the man whose name they desperately needed.
No, Marcus.
And I didn't understand why.
Don't make a scene
Not yet.
today.
Because while they were busy making me feel small, someone was already using my name to get something they could never get on their own.
Elena.
The truth would eventually cost me my marriage.
Don't make a scene.
But before I discovered what they were doing, I had to find out why they needed my name in the first place. To support the channel, you can visit our store and check our new product around. It's designed to help you pause, understand what's really happening in your relationship, and make clearer decisions instead of reacting in the heat of the moment. There's no one telling you what decision to make. You work through it yourself. The link is in the description. Let's get back to today's story. 6 years earlier, nobody in Elena's family thought Adrian was worth much. Not because he had done anything wrong. He simply didn't have the things they respected. The expensive car, the corner office, the designer clothes, the kind of bank account that made people listen before you finished speaking. Adrian had none of that. And he never tried to pretend otherwise. He worked quietly, paid his bills, came home late, and lived a life that looked completely ordinary from the outside. Elena had met him before any of that mattered. At least, that's what Adrian believed. When they first started dating, she didn't ask how much he made. She didn't ask what his family owned. She didn't ask who his father was. She just liked being around him. And Adrian loved that about her. That was why, when his father gave him one condition before he could take control of the family company, Adrian agreed without hesitation. Stay away from the family business. Build a life of your own. And never tell Elena about the inheritance. His father wanted one thing from him, to find out who Adrian would become when nobody treated him like an heir. So Adrian did exactly that. He built a life with Elena, a small apartment, simple dinners, weekend drives. Bills they complained about together. It wasn't glamorous, but Adrian didn't care. He had something he had never been sure money could buy. A woman who seemed to love him when she thought he had nothing. For the first few years, that was enough. Then things started changing. Not dramatically. That would have been easier to notice. It started with little comments. Elena would come home from dinner with her family and mention what someone else's husband had bought. A new car. A bigger house, a vacation overseas. Then she'd look at Adrian. "Do you ever think about doing more?" she asked him one night. Adrian looked up from his dinner. "More like what?" She hesitated. "I don't know." Then she smiled. "Forget it." He didn't forget it. A few months later, Elena's family began asking Adrian questions directly. What exactly did he do? How much did he earn? Why hadn't he started his own company? Why was Elena still living in an apartment after 6 years? Adrian answered politely. He never lied about his job. He simply never told them what existed behind it. That distinction would matter later. Very much. Because Victor Cross, Elena's father, had a particular way of looking at people. He measured them quickly. Their clothes, their connections, their usefulness. And Adrian could tell exactly where he stood in that calculation. Near the bottom. Still, Elena stayed. Or at least Adrian thought she did. Then came the first thing he couldn't explain. Elena began receiving expensive gifts from her family. A new watch, a designer handbag, a weekend trip. She said they were presents. Adrian didn't question them until one evening she placed an envelope on their kitchen table. "What's this?" Adrian asked. Elena sat down across from him. "Something my father wants you to sign." Adrian opened it. He read the first page, then the second. He looked at Elena. "What is this?" "Nothing serious," she said. "It just helps with something my father is working on." Adrian turned another page. His name was printed across the top. His personal information was there, his address, his employment history, even details he had never given Victor. He closed the folder. I don't sign things I don't understand. Elena's expression changed. You don't trust my family? I don't trust documents I haven't read. She stared at him for a moment. Then she picked up the folder. Fine. She walked away with it. Adrian thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, he received an alert from his bank. A transaction he didn't recognize. Then another. He checked his account. Nothing had been withdrawn, but someone had attempted to use his identity. Adrian called the bank. They couldn't tell him much. The application had been submitted under his name. He asked for a copy. When it arrived, he recognized the signature. It looked like his, almost perfect. Except Adrian had never signed it. He sat alone at the kitchen table that night, staring at the document. For the first time since marrying Elena, he wondered whether the secret he had kept from her was still protecting their marriage, or protecting the people around her. His phone rang. It was his father's legal advisor. Adrian answered. The man's voice was unusually serious. "Mr. Vale, you need to come to the office tomorrow morning." "Why?" There was a pause. "Your father's instructions have changed." Adrian sat up. What happened? Another pause. Then the advisor said, "The board has been informed that your father intends to transfer control of the company." Adrian already knew what that meant, but the next sentence was the one that changed everything. "And the transfer is happening much sooner than expected." Adrian looked down at the fraudulent document still sitting on the table. For 6 years, he had been watching the people around him without letting them know who he really was. Now, someone had started moving pieces on the board, and Adrian had a feeling. The first move hadn't come from his family. It had come from inside his own home. The next morning, Adrian didn't tell Elena where he was going. She was still asleep when he left. He stood beside the bedroom door for a moment, looking back at her. 6 years of marriage. 6 years of believing he knew the woman sleeping in that room. Then he walked out. His father's legal advisor was waiting when Adrian arrived at the Valecrest offices. The building was nothing like the life Adrian had been pretending to live. Glass walls, private elevators, executives moving through the lobby with assistants beside them, and people who knew exactly who Adrian was. He had spent 6 years avoiding this place. Now he was walking straight toward it. The advisor handed him a folder. "We found several applications connected to your identity," he said. Adrian opened it. The first one was the loan, $300,000. The borrower had used Adrian's name, employment information, address, and a copy of his signature. He turned the page. Another account, another application, another transaction. Then he saw the purchase records. Luxury furniture, jewelry, a vehicle, all purchased under his identity. Adrian looked up. "Who has access to this information?" The advisor didn't answer immediately. "That's what we're trying to determine." Adrian closed the folder. "I already know who has access to most of it." He didn't say Elena's name. He didn't need to. The advisor studied him. "Are you certain?" "No," Adrian replied. "Not yet." That distinction mattered, because Adrian wasn't going to accuse his wife based on suspicion. He wanted proof, real proof, something nobody could explain away. So he asked the legal team to investigate quietly. No calls to Elena, no confrontation, no police, nothing that would warn whoever was behind it. Then Adrian went home. Elena was already awake. She was standing in the kitchen when he walked in. "You're up early," she said. "So are you." She smiled. Couldn't sleep. Neither could Adrian. He placed his keys on the counter. "Did you use my information for anything recently?" Elena stopped moving. It lasted barely a second, but Adrian noticed. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one." She looked away. "No," Adrian nodded. "Okay." That was all he said. He didn't tell her about the bank. He didn't mention the documents. And he certainly didn't tell her that his father's lawyers were already investigating. He wanted to see what she would do next. That evening, Elena's family invited them to dinner. Adrian almost refused. Then he changed his mind. If someone was using his identity, he wanted to sit across from them, watch them, listen, and see what they believed they had gotten away with. Victor Cross was already at the table when they arrived. Marissa was beside him. She looked Adrian up and down. "You're still wearing that watch?" Adrian smiled politely. "Apparently." She laughed. "I don't know how you managed to stay so comfortable with so little." Elena glanced at her sister. "Marissa." "What?" Marissa replied. "I'm just saying." Victor cut into his food. Adrian, have you ever considered doing something bigger with your life? Adrian looked at him. I've considered a lot of things. Victor smiled. Good. Then he leaned back, because Elena deserves more than ordinary. Adrian said nothing. Elena didn't either. That silence told him more than either of them realized. The conversation moved on, but Adrian noticed something else. Victor kept checking his phone, every few minutes. Eventually, he excused himself from the table. Adrian waited. Then, when Victor stepped outside, Adrian followed. He stopped before reaching the door. Victor was speaking quietly. I told you the paperwork was handled. A pause. No, he doesn't know. Another pause. Victor turned slightly. Adrian stepped back before he could be seen. He returned to the table. A few minutes later, Victor came back inside. Their eyes met. Neither man said anything, but Adrian knew now that he wasn't imagining things. Someone in that family was involved. The question was, how many of them? 2 days later, the answer began to emerge. Adrian's legal team found the company connected to the fraudulent loan. It was registered under a name he recognized, Cross Premier Events, Victor's company. Adrian stared at the report. Then he turned to the next page. The application listed Adrian as a financial partner, a partner who had supposedly invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, money he had never invested, a signature he had never written, a company he had never agreed to join. Adrian leaned back. Now he had proof. But there was something else in the file. A second name. Elena Cross, his wife, not listed as an employee, not listed as a witness, listed as an authorized signatory. Adrian read that line again, then once more. This time he didn't need anyone to explain what it meant. Elena hadn't simply known about the documents. She had access to them, and she had signed them. Still, Adrian didn't confront her, not yet, because the legal team had found something even bigger. The fraudulent loan wasn't the only thing Cross Premier Events had done. They had submitted another application. This one was worth nearly $1 million, and the deadline was approaching. Adrian looked at the date. 3 days. 3 days until the application would either be approved or trigger an investigation. He closed the folder. For 6 years, Adrian had hidden his identity because he wanted to know whether Elena loved the man or the money behind the man. Now he had a different problem. He already knew what Elena had done, but he still didn't know why. And until he knew that, he wasn't ready to end the marriage. Because sometimes the truth isn't the first thing you discover. Sometimes it's the thing you discover underneath it. 3 days later, the application was still sitting on the desk of the bank's review department, and Adrian still hadn't confronted Elena. Instead, he did something she never expected. He let the application move forward. Not because he wanted the loan approved, because he wanted to see who would come running when it was. That morning, Adrian sat in his car outside Cross Premier Events. Through the glass doors, he could see Victor moving between offices. Marissa was carrying a stack of documents, and Elena was sitting at a desk speaking to someone on the phone. For a few minutes, Adrian simply watched. Then his phone rang. His father's legal advisor. We found the original authorization. Adrian straightened. Whose? Your wife's. He closed his eyes briefly. Send it to me. A document appeared on his phone. At the bottom was Elena's signature. Beside it was another signature. Victor's. But there was something else. A handwritten note in the margin. Adrian zoomed in. The note was short. Once the financing clears, transfer the ownership structure. Adrian read it again. Ownership structure. He had assumed they were trying to borrow money using his identity. He hadn't realized they were preparing to move ownership of the company itself. His phone rang again. This time it was Elena. Where are you? Out. You didn't come home last night. I had work. She was quiet. Then she asked, Are you angry with me? Adrian looked through the windshield. No. That answer came too quickly. Elena noticed. You sound different. I've just been thinking. About what? He almost told her. Instead he asked, Do you love me, Elena? Silence. Not the kind that comes from confusion, the kind that comes when someone is choosing an answer. Of course I do, she finally said. Adrian smiled faintly. Okay. Why are you asking me that? Nothing. He ended the call. For the first time in 6 years, Adrian didn't feel like he was protecting their marriage. He was measuring how much of it was left. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. The bank called him. The fraudulent application had been flagged. The $1 million request had triggered a secondary review, and the bank wanted Adrian to appear in person. Adrian agreed. But before he left, his father's advisor called again. "There is one more thing." Adrian stopped walking. "What?" "Your father left instructions regarding the transfer of control. I thought you said the transfer was already approved." "It is." "Then what's the problem?" The advisor paused. "He specifically instructed us not to announce your appointment until the Meridian Legacy Gala." Adrian looked at the calendar. "How long?" 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Adrian understood immediately. His father hadn't simply wanted to transfer the company. He had wanted Adrian to inherit it publicly, in front of the people who had spent years underestimating him. Adrian looked back toward the cross-premier events building. He could expose Elena today. He could expose Victor. He could end everything. But something stopped him. Not revenge. Proof. If he acted too soon, they could claim ignorance. If he waited, they would reveal everything themselves. So Adrian made a decision. He would say nothing. He would let them continue, and he would watch. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena became increasingly distant. She started coming home later, taking calls in another room, changing passwords, receiving documents she never discussed with him. One evening, Adrian came home earlier than expected. He found Elena in the living room with Victor. They stopped talking when he walked in. Victor stood immediately. "We were just leaving," Adrian nodded. "Sure." Victor walked past him. Elena remained behind. "What are you doing home?" "It's my house," she smiled awkwardly. "You know what I mean." Adrian looked at her, then he noticed the envelope on the table, a bank logo. He picked it up. Elena reached for it. "That's private." Adrian handed it back. "Of course." She took the envelope and walked away. That night Adrian barely slept, not because he was afraid of what they were doing, because he was beginning to understand what they thought of him. They weren't treating him like a husband anymore. They were treating him like an asset, a name they could use, a signature they could borrow, a life they could manipulate. And that was the part Adrian couldn't forgive. The following morning, he received the final report. Everything was there. The forged applications, the unauthorized purchases, the false partnership documents, the ownership transfer plan, and one final piece of evidence. A recorded conversation between Victor and Elena. Adrian pressed play. Victor's voice came through the speaker. "If the loan clears, we can finally move the company into our structure." Elena answered quietly. "And Adrian?" Victor laughed. "He'll never understand what happened until it's too late." The recording ended. Adrian sat completely still. 6 years. 6 years of believing he had married the woman he loved. Now he knew. They weren't waiting for him to become successful. They were waiting for him to become useful. He turned off the recording. Then his father's advisor sent him one final message. "The board has confirmed your appointment." Adrian looked at the words, then at the wedding photograph sitting on his desk. He picked it up. For a moment he remembered the woman Elena used to be, or maybe the woman he wanted her to be. He placed the photograph back down. The Meridian Legacy Gala was 10 days away. That would be the night the world learned who Adrian Vale really was. But before that happened, Adrian still had one more thing to do. He needed to find out how far Elena was willing to go. 10 days before the Meridian Legacy Gala, Adrian made a decision. He was going to give Elena one final chance to tell him the truth. Not because the evidence wasn't enough. It was. He simply needed to know whether there was anything left of the woman he had married. That evening, he came home earlier than usual. Elena was in the bedroom, speaking quietly on the phone. Adrian stopped outside the door when he heard Victor's name. "I know," Elena said. A pause. "No, he doesn't suspect anything." Another pause. "Once the transfer is complete, everything changes." Adrian stood there for a moment. Then he walked inside. Elena immediately ended the call. "You're home." "I am." She smiled. "Everything okay?" Adrian looked at her. "Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. What kind of question is that? "A simple one." She laughed softly. "Of course I'm happy." "Even with me?" Her smile faded. "Why wouldn't I be?" Adrian nodded. "I just wanted to hear you say it." He walked past her. Elena watched him disappear into the hallway. She had no idea that conversation would become the last lie Adrian ever accepted from her. The following morning, the final documents were submitted. The $1 million financing request was approved for further review. Victor celebrated. Marissa celebrated. Elena celebrated. They thought everything was finally working. They didn't know the entire transaction had already been flagged by Valicrest's legal department, and Adrian wasn't the only person watching anymore. The bank was watching. The lawyers were watching. The board was watching. Everyone was waiting for the final piece. Then it happened. An email arrived at Cross Premier Events. The bank requested a face-to-face verification meeting with the person whose identity had been used for the application. Adrian. Elena read the email twice. Then she called Victor. "What do we do?" Victor's answer was immediate. "Nothing. But Adrian will have to go. Let him." Elena hesitated. "Why?" Victor laughed. "Because by the time he understands what's happening, we'll already have what we need." Elena didn't ask what he meant. She should have. That afternoon, Adrian received an invitation, not from the bank, from Victor, a family dinner. Adrian almost laughed when he saw it. After everything that had happened, they still wanted him sitting at their table. He accepted. That night, everyone was there. Victor, Marissa, Elena, and Adrian. They ate, they laughed, they talked about the future. Victor even raised a glass. To new beginnings. Adrian lifted his glass. To new beginnings. Nobody noticed the difference in his voice. Then Victor looked at him. "Adrian, there's something we need to discuss." Adrian put his glass down. "Go ahead." Victor slid a document across the table. "We need your signature." Adrian looked at it. He recognized the structure immediately. It was another authorization document. Another attempt to use his identity. But this time there was something different. They weren't asking him to borrow money. They were asking him to transfer his rights to the company they'd created using his name. Adrian looked at Elena. She couldn't meet his eyes. That was his answer. He pushed the document back. "No." Victor's expression hardened. "Think carefully." "I have. You've never had anything to lose before." Adrian smiled. "You'd be surprised." Victor leaned forward. "You don't understand what you're throwing away." Adrian stood. "I understand exactly what I'm throwing away." He looked at Elena. 6 years. Then he walked out. Outside, his father's advisor was waiting. Adrian got into the car. "Everything ready?" "Yes." "The gala?" "Everything." Adrian looked out the window. "Then we're done waiting." 3 days later, the Meridian Legacy Gala began. The ballroom was filled with executives, investors, celebrities, politicians, and some of the wealthiest people in the city. Victor arrived with Elena and Marissa. They were dressed for the biggest night of their lives. They believed they were finally entering the world they had always wanted. Elena looked around the room. "Imagine what this could mean for us," she whispered. Victor smiled. "It means we've made it." Then the lights dimmed. The crowd turned toward the stage. A host walked to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen." A pause. "Tonight we welcome the new chairman of Valicrest Holdings." Applause filled the room. Victor smiled. Marissa leaned toward Elena. "Who is it?" Elena watched the stage. Then the doors opened. Adrian walked in. The applause continued. Victor's smile disappeared. Marissa stopped breathing. Elena stared at the stage. "No." Adrian walked to the microphone. He looked across the room. Then his eyes found Elena. He didn't smile. He simply said, "My name is Adrian Vale." Silence. The new chairman of Valicrest Holdings. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And somewhere in that silence, Elena finally understood. The man she had spent 6 years treating like he had nothing had been the one person in the room who had everything. Adrian looked toward the audience. "But tonight isn't about my appointment." He paused. "It's about something much more important." The screen behind him came alive. Documents appeared. Bank applications, signatures, transaction records, names. Elena's face went pale. Victor stood frozen. Adrian looked directly at them. "For 6 years, I kept my identity private because I wanted to know who loved me, and who loved what they thought I could give them." He stepped away from the microphone. "And now we know." Nobody moved. The documents remained on the screen behind Adrian, one after another. The fraudulent loan, the unauthorized purchases, the signatures, the company records, and finally, the authorization bearing Elena's name. Victor was the first to speak. "This is a misunderstanding." Adrian looked at him. "No." Victor stepped forward. "You don't understand what happened." "I understand exactly what happened." Elena finally found her voice. "Adrian?" He looked at her. She walked toward the stage. "Please." The room was silent. "I didn't know everything," she said. Adrian didn't answer. "I knew about the loan," Elena continued. I knew my father was using your information, but I didn't know how far he was going. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. And the purchases? Elena lowered her eyes. I knew about some of them. That answer hurt more than a denial would have, because 6 years of marriage had come down to the word some. Elena wiped her eyes. I loved you. Adrian nodded slowly. I believe you. She looked up. Then why are you doing this? Because loving someone doesn't give you permission to destroy them. Elena stopped. Adrian continued. You didn't betray me because you thought I was poor. You betrayed me because you thought my name was something you could use. Nobody spoke. Victor suddenly stepped forward. This company would never have survived without us. Adrian looked at him. You're right. Victor seemed surprised. Adrian continued. You built something. You just built it on someone else's identity. The legal team moved forward. The authorities would handle the fraud. The bank would handle the financial investigation, and Valacrest would cooperate with every part of it. Adrian wasn't going to decide their punishment himself. He didn't need to. The evidence would do that. Later that night, the ballroom had emptied. Adrian stood alone near the windows. Elena approached him. She wasn't wearing the confident expression she had arrived with. She looked tired. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. You don't have to say anything. She stood beside him. Was any of it real? Adrian looked at her. Our marriage? Yes. He took a breath. Yes. That answer made her cry. So what changed? You did. She looked down. No. Adrian shook his head. You stopped seeing me as your husband. You started seeing me as a problem that needed solving. Elena couldn't answer. After a long silence, she asked, Do you hate me? Adrian looked toward the empty ballroom. No. She looked at him. I thought I would. He continued, but hate would mean I still want something from you. And I don't. That was the last conversation they ever had as husband and wife. The divorce came months later. The investigation continued. Victor and Marissa faced the consequences of the fraud. Elena cooperated with the investigation. She lost the life she thought money would give her. But Adrian never tried to destroy her beyond what the law required. Instead, he did something nobody expected. He created a financial abuse protection fund through Valacrest. It helped people whose identities had been stolen, people who had been buried under debts they never created, people who had signed nothing, yet spent years paying for someone else's choices. One afternoon, Adrian's father's legal advisor asked him why he had done it. Adrian looked at the reports on his desk. Because I was lucky. The advisor frowned. How? Because I discovered the truth before the damage became permanent. He closed the file. Most people don't. Months later, Adrian returned to the same restaurant where he and Elena had celebrated their first anniversary. He sat alone. No security team. No executives. No expensive event. Just a quiet table by the window. For years he had wondered whether hiding his wealth had been the right decision. Now he knew the answer. He hadn't needed to hide his money. He had needed to pay attention. Because wealth doesn't reveal character. Power doesn't reveal character. Even poverty doesn't reveal character. What reveals character is what someone does when they believe nobody is watching. Adrian looked out the window. Then he smiled. Not because he had won, because he had finally stopped asking whether Elena had loved him. Some questions don't need answers. Sometimes the way someone treats you is the answer. And if you were Adrian, would you have forgiven Elena after discovering everything she had done, or would the betrayal have ended the marriage for you? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if you want more stories about betrayal, hidden identities, unexpected reversals, and people getting exactly what they deserve, subscribe, because the next story might make you question who you trust all over again. But the story has not ended yet. There was one question Adrian couldn't stop thinking about, and you watching right now might have the same question. If Elena's family truly believed he had nothing, why had they used his identity to borrow millions? The question bothered him even after everything was exposed. So before the final legal proceedings began, Adrian asked his father's legal advisor to investigate one thing. How did Victor find out about my financial history? The advisor looked at him. You really want to know? Yes. He opened a file. Your father created a private trust for you years ago. Adrian already knew about the trust, but what he didn't know was who else had discovered it. The advisor continued. Your trust was deliberately kept out of ordinary public records, but someone accessed information connected to it. Who? Victor Cross. Adrian stared at him. How? Private investigators. The advisor placed another document on the desk. Your father was careful. Victor couldn't see the full value of the trust, but he could see enough to know that you were the beneficiary of substantial family assets. Adrian looked at the report. Suddenly, everything made sense. The questions, the documents, the loan applications, the way Victor had always insisted Adrian sign certain papers, even the strange confidence behind the fraud. They hadn't thought Adrian was completely worthless. They had simply thought he was too stupid to know what he was worth. And then came the part that hurt the most. The advisor handed him another document, a copy of an email. The sender was Elena. Adrian read it once, then again, then a third time. He didn't need to read it again. The message had been sent to Victor 2 years earlier. It contained one sentence that changed everything. I found the trust documents. Adrian doesn't know how much is actually there. Adrian lowered the paper. For years, he had believed Elena loved him because she had chosen him when she thought he had nothing. Now he understood something he had never considered. At some point, she had discovered that he wasn't poor. She had simply never told him that she knew. Instead, she had allowed him to keep believing that his secret was safe. And while he was protecting their marriage, she was protecting a secret of her own. The millions hadn't been borrowed because they believed Adrian was worthless. They were borrowed because they believed his name could unlock something they could never obtain themselves. His trust, his identity, his future. They just never realized that the man they were exploiting was also the man who would eventually control the entire company they were trying to build. Adrian sat quietly for a long time. Then he asked the advisor one question. Did Elena ever know who I really was? The advisor shook his head. Not completely. Adrian looked back at the email. No, he corrected himself. She knew enough. And that was the part Adrian finally understood. The betrayal wasn't that Elena discovered he had money. The betrayal was that she discovered the truth and chose to use it instead of asking him about it. That was why the loans had been so large. That was why they had been so confident. And that was why they had never been afraid of Adrian finding out. They thought they had found the one secret that could make him useful. They never imagined he was the one person capable of taking everything back. Adrian closed the file. He didn't feel victorious. He felt finished, because now there was nothing left to wonder about. He knew why they used his name. He knew when Elena found out. And he finally knew what the 6 years of silence had really been hiding. Not just his wealth, her decision. And sometimes that's the truth that hurts the most. If someone you loved secretly discovered you were worth far more than they thought, and instead of telling you they used your identity to build their own future, would you ever trust them again? Tell me honestly in the comments.